The Parker family had been anticipating this vacation for months. Ethan Parker, a dedicated FBI agent, rarely had the chance to step away from his demanding job and spend uninterrupted time with his family. His work required constant readiness, often keeping him away from home. His wife, Lena, a highly respected lawyer committed to fighting for justice, also had an intense career. The couple had finally managed to carve out time for a break, ensuring their two children, Jackson and Emily, could enjoy a peaceful retreat away from their hectic lives. Their destination was a luxurious beachfront resort, where golden sands met crystal clear waters, and the sound of waves provided a tranquil escape. Ethan reclined on a lounge chair by the pool, sunglasses on, breathing in the rare sense of relaxation he seldom experienced. Lena sat beside him, engrossed in a novel she had been eager to finish, savoring the calm moment. Their children played in the pool nearby. Jackson, a confident 12-year-old, challenged his younger sister, Emily, to a race, their laughter filling the air. Everything about this trip felt perfect. That peace was short-lived. Ethan noticed a security guard approaching. The man, clad in a dark polo shirt, carried himself with authority, though his expression held a hint of suspicion. He stopped in front of Ethan, glancing between him and his family before speaking in a firm yet distant tone. "Excuse me, sir. I need to verify that you're a guest here." Ethan pushed his sunglasses onto his forehead, sitting up. He met the guard's gaze with calm composure. "I am a guest," he replied simply. Lena closed her book, her lawyer instincts immediately sensing the weight of the situation. They had encountered moments like this before, moments where their presence was questioned in places where they supposedly didn't fit in. The guard's expression remained neutral, though his posture hinted at something less than welcoming. "Just procedure. I'll need your room number." Ethan remained composed. 305. "We checked in yesterday." The guard nodded but made no move to leave. "I'll need to confirm that with the front desk." Lena, now fully engaged, sat upright. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with awareness. "No problem, ma'am. Just routine," the guard replied, though his demeanor suggested otherwise. Ethan had seen this play out before. He exhaled, turning to Lena. "Let them check," he murmured. She gave him a knowing look but said nothing further. The guard walked away, but the tension remained, tainting the once carefree atmosphere. A few minutes later, the situation escalated. The guard returned, this time with a colleague. Their expressions had shifted, there was no longer an attempt at politeness. They walked toward the Parker family with a rigid sense of purpose. "Sir," the first guard said, his voice firmer than before. "Until we can confirm your information, I need you and your family to leave the pool area." Ethan sat up straighter. "We've already provided our room number. You can call the front desk instead of asking us to leave," he responded evenly. Lena stood, frustration creeping into her expression. "We've answered your questions. Why are you asking us to leave?" The second guard spoke up, his tone distant and rehearsed. "We've had some issues with non-guests sneaking into the pool area. This is just a precaution." Lena's sharp gaze locked onto him. "So, what is this about, really? Because it looks an awful lot like you're making assumptions about us." The guard hesitated but held his ground. "We apply this policy to everyone." Lena crossed her arms. "Really? Because I've been sitting here for a while now, and I haven't seen you approach anyone else." Ethan reached for Lena's hand, a silent gesture meant to steady the situation. He knew the routine, knew how easily these things could spiral. "Let them check," he said again, voice controlled. A younger guard, standing nearby, scoffed. "Look, we're just doing our jobs. If you have a problem, you can speak to management." Lena narrowed her eyes. "And in the meantime, my children are forced to watch their parents be treated like criminals." The tension thickened. Other resort guests were beginning to take notice. Some whispered among themselves, others pulled out their phones to record. The security guards, now aware of the growing audience, exchanged nervous glances. One of them spoke into his radio. Moments later, two local police officers arrived, their expressions unreadable as they approached the Parker family. The once relaxed atmosphere around the pool turned cold. A tall officer stepped forward, his voice devoid of warmth. "We received a report of a disturbance. I need to see your identification." Ethan, who had spent his career managing tense situations, felt anger coil in his chest. He rose slowly, ensuring his movements were deliberate. I already told the security guards, we're guests here. Room 305. We have done nothing wrong. His voice remained calm, but firm. I'm Ethan Parker, an FBI agent. The officer barely reacted. Hand over your ID. Lena bristled, stepping forward. You're seriously demanding his ID after he just told you he's a federal agent. The officer didn't acknowledge her. His focus remained on Ethan. His hand hovered near his belt, where his handcuffs hung. ID. Now, Ethan knew the weight of the moment. One wrong move, and this could escalate beyond control. He reached into his pocket, slowly retrieved his wallet, and pulled out his badge. He extended it to the officer. For the first time, hesitation flickered across the officer's face. He examined the badge, the reality of the situation settling in. The security guards exchanged uncertain glances. Lena, still fuming, didn't let up. So, are we done here? Or are we going to continue this baseless interrogation? The officer exhaled sharply before nodding. You're free to go. Ethan took his badge back, his gaze unwavering. We were free to be here from the start. The officers turned away, muttering to the guards before leaving. The watching crowd slowly dispersed, though some guests continued to eye the Parker family. Ethan turned to Lena and the kids. Jackson looked up at him, confusion and unease in his young eyes. Why did they do that, Dad? Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. Some people make judgments before they know the truth. But we know who we are. That's what matters. Lena, still simmering, exhaled deeply. This was supposed to be a vacation. Ethan glanced at the ocean beyond the resort, the waves crashing against the shore as if nothing had happened. Let's not let them take that from us, he said. But even as they tried to return to their peaceful getaway, the weight of the experience lingered. Because for Ethan, Lena, and their children, this wasn't just one isolated moment. It was a reflection of a reality they knew all too well. The officer took the badge, examined it briefly, and then handed it back with a sneer. I don't care about this badge. I need real identification, not something you can buy at a souvenir shop. Lena clenched her fists, her breath quickening as her anger surged. What did you just say? She nearly shouted, but before she could do more, Ethan placed a firm yet calming hand on her shoulder. Stay calm, Lena, he said softly, though inside, he was seething. The officer kept his gaze locked on Ethan, his eyes filled with contempt. I won't ask again. Provide valid ID, or we'll take further action. Ethan knew exactly where this was heading. He had seen too many situations like this before. With no other choice, he pulled out his driver's license and handed it over. Here's my valid ID, he said, his voice cold. The officer barely glanced at it before tossing it back at him. We still haven't gotten confirmation from the hotel, so until we do, I'm asking you and your family to leave this area. Lena had had enough. She stepped toward the officer, her voice sharp and unyielding. Enough. We are guests here, and we're not going anywhere. If you continue to harass my family, I will make sure you pay for this. What you're doing is entirely unlawful, and I will bring this issue to the public. The officer stiffened, his eyes flashing with defiance. Who do you think you are, threatening us like that? Lena straightened, unwavering. I'm a lawyer. My husband is a federal agent. You've made a grave mistake by treating us this way, and I won't let it go unnoticed. A tense silence hung over the pool area. People began whispering, some raising their phones to record. Ethan's stomach tightened. He could feel the situation spiraling, and one wrong move could make everything worse beyond repair. The younger officer, the one who had been the most aggressive, stepped forward, pulling out his handcuffs. Put your hands behind your back, or we'll use force. Ethan remained still, his eyes locked onto the officers. You're making a big mistake, he said, his voice controlled but dangerous. He stood firm, staring directly at the officer as he approached with the cuffs. In that moment, memories flooded his mind, memories that made his blood boil. He remembered his early days as an FBI agent, taking down criminals, dismantling dangerous operations, risking his life for justice. And yet, here he was, being treated as if he were the criminal. The injustice of it burned in his chest. He thought of a case 5 years ago, one that had changed him forever. A young black man, unarmed, gunned down by officers who never faced consequences. Ethan had led the investigation, uncovering a horrifying pattern of abuse. He had believed he was making a difference. He had fought for justice. But standing here now, it all felt like a bitter lie. He glanced at Lena, his wife, the woman who had dedicated her life to defending those without power. But today, she wasn't just a lawyer, she was a wife watching her husband being treated like a common criminal. And then he saw Jackson. His son stood nearby, his face filled with confusion and hurt. Emily clung to her mother, her eyes brimming with fear. Ethan's heart clenched. He had always tried to protect them from this, but today, there was no shield strong enough. The officer reached out, snapping the cuffs onto Ethan's wrists. The cold metal bit into his skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the ache in his heart as he saw the horror on his children's faces. Emily sobbed, clutching onto Lena. Jackson's hands curled into fists, his young mind trying to process the humiliation his father was enduring. Lena's fury reached its breaking point. She strode toward the officer, her voice cutting through the thick air. "That's enough." The onlookers fell silent, their phones still recording. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you even realize you're cuffing a federal agent?" Her voice was razor sharp, carrying the full weight of her anger and authority. The young officer barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, if you don't step back, we'll have to detain you as well." Lena didn't budge. "Detain me? You have no right. You're treating my husband like a criminal in front of our children, and I won't let this go." The older officer, the one who had remained silent until now, stepped forward as if sensing the situation was slipping beyond their control. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Your husband wasn't complying." Lena let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Doing your job? Is your job to harass a family? To arrest an innocent man because of the color of his skin? I'll show you what justice looks like. I'm a lawyer. I know our rights. The moment you put your hands on my husband without just cause, you broke the law." The older officer hesitated, glancing at the growing crowd. The murmurs of disapproval were getting louder. Some guests had stopped trying to be discreet with their filming. This was quickly turning into a public relations nightmare. But the young officer, still defiant, didn't seem to realize the danger he was in. "We have the right to ask for valid identification." He didn't comply immediately. "That's enough for us to act." Lena stepped even closer, her voice cold and precise. "I told you clearly, my husband is a federal agent. You ignored that. Do you understand what that means? Not only have you broken the law, but you've humiliated us, traumatized our children, and destroyed any credibility you had." Jackson took a hesitant step forward, his face hardening as he finally found his voice. "You're arresting my dad for nothing. Why?" Emily wiped her tears with her small hands. "Why are you doing this?" Lena turned to look at her children, then back at the officers. Her voice softened but remained firm. "Look at my children. Look at what you're doing to them. Is this what your badge stands for? Is this the justice you claim to uphold?" For the first time, the young officer faltered. The weight of the eyes on him, the cameras, the reality of his actions, it all began to sink in. He glanced at his partner, but the older officer was already stepping back, his expression one of regret and silent realization. The tension in the air was suffocating. Then, finally, the older officer gave a short nod to his partner. "Let him go." The young officer hesitated, his pride clashing with his logic. But as the murmurs in the crowd turned into open disdain, as Lena's eyes burned into him, he finally reached for the cuffs and unlocked them. Ethan flexed his wrists, the sting of metal still fresh, but he didn't move right away. He looked at his children, at Lena, then at the officers. "I won't forget this," he said quietly. "And neither will they." As he took his wife's hand, Jackson stepped closer, his young voice carrying across the poolside. "You were wrong about my dad. You were wrong about all of us." The officers didn't respond. They simply stepped back, knowing that, in the eyes of everyone watching, they had already lost. And as Ethan led his family away, the whispers of the crowd followed them, along with the quiet certainty that this fight wasn't over yet. No family should have to endure such humiliation, nor should any child grow up with the constant fear that their parents could be taken away simply because of their skin color. Lena's voice trembled with emotion, but she refused to waver. "You think I'll stay silent while my husband is treated like this?" she said, her voice rising in intensity. "You think I'll just stand by while my children endure this kind of humiliation? No, I will make sure the world knows what you've done, and I will see to it that you pay for this." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, turning into a chorus of outrage. What had begun as hushed whispers and furtive glances had now evolved into open discussions. Some tourists who had initially only observed were now vocal in their condemnation, and many had their phones raised, capturing every second of the injustice unfolding before them. Lena could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the growing support from the onlookers feeding her resolve. The young officer, still oblivious to the severity of the situation, stood firm, his jaw set in defiance. But the older officer was beginning to grasp the consequences of their actions. His eyes darted nervously around the gathering crowd, noting the disapproving glares and the sea of phone cameras aimed at them. The realization struck him hard. This situation was quickly spiraling beyond their control, and if they didn't handle it carefully, it would explode across social media in a matter of hours. "I suggest you calm down, ma'am, or we will have to take stronger action," the younger officer threatened, but the bravado in his voice was faltering. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, the reality sinking in that they had miscalculated the consequences of their actions. Lena, unwavering, took a step forward. "I am perfectly calm," she said, her voice steady but laced with steel. "But if you don't release my husband this instant, I will make sure this turns into your worst nightmare." A tense silence settled over the scene. The crowd held its breath. The officers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. The older officer, realizing there was no turning back now, muttered under his breath, "That's enough. Release him." The younger officer hesitated for a brief moment before reluctantly pulling out the key. The metallic click of the handcuffs unlocking seemed to reverberate through the air. Ethan rubbed his wrists, his face calm, but Lena knew that underneath that composure, fury simmered just beneath the surface. "Prepare to answer for every action you've taken," Lena declared, her gaze burning into the officers as if daring them to challenge her. As the cuffs fell away, Jackson and Emily rushed to their father's side. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable, but the damage had already been done. The trauma etched itself into the faces of their children, leaving scars no parent could ever wish upon their child. Jackson, his wide eyes brimming with confusion and frustration, stepped forward, his voice small but firm. "Dad, why did they do that to you? You didn't do anything wrong." Ethan knelt down to meet his son's gaze, his heart breaking at the pain reflected in his child's eyes. "Sometimes people act out of ignorance and fear," he explained gently, placing a reassuring hand on Jackson's shoulder. "But what's important is that we don't let them define us. We stand our ground. We fight back the right way." Jackson bit his lip, his fists clenching. He wasn't sure he understood, but he knew one thing for certain, something inside him had shifted forever. Emily, younger and more innocent, clung to her mother. "Mommy, is Daddy okay? Did they hurt him?" Lena knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "Daddy's fine, sweetheart," she whispered, though the fire of injustice still burned within her. "We're all fine. And we will get through this together." But deep down, Lena knew the truth. Her daughter would carry this moment with her for a long time, if not forever. A piece of childhood innocence had been stripped away, replaced with fear and confusion. No child should ever have to witness such a thing, and yet, here they were. The murmurs in the crowd continued, an undercurrent of disbelief and anger. While some recorded, others stood frozen in their own silent outrage. The moment was no longer just about Ethan or Lena, it was about everyone who had ever been subjected to this kind of treatment. And Lena knew this was far from over. She stood, her gaze locking onto the officers with unwavering determination. "What you've done is unforgivable," she said, her voice cold but steady. "And I will not let you walk away from this without facing the consequences." Ethan straightened beside her, his presence solid and unyielding. "We won't just fight for our own justice," he added, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We'll fight for everyone else who's ever had to endure this." The older officer lowered his gaze, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew the damage was irreversible. The videos, the crowd, the determination in Lena's and Ethan's eyes, it all pointed to an inevitable storm brewing on the horizon. Jackson and Emily, too young to grasp the full gravity of the moment but old enough to feel its weight, stood quietly, absorbing every second of it. This memory would shape them. It would change them. And Ethan knew that more than anyone. Lena turned to him, her expression resolute. "We won't stop here," she whispered. "We'll fight this all the way." Ethan nodded. "We won't stop. With a renewed sense of purpose, Lena pulled out her phone and immediately dialed her colleague at the law office. She was more than a wife and mother, she was a force to be reckoned with. And she wasn't just going to make noise. She was going to make change. "Ella," she said as soon as the call connected, "I need you to start gathering everything on this case immediately. We were just harassed by the police at the resort, unlawfully detained. Ethan was handcuffed in front of our children. We're filing a lawsuit against both the police and the resort." The older officer stepped forward, attempting one last effort to de-escalate. "Ma'am, we understand that this has been an upsetting situation. We will conduct an internal investigation." "You've crossed a line," Lena interrupted, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "Your officers humiliated and traumatized my family. There's no peace after what you've done. You will be held accountable." She ended the call and turned back to the officer, her stance firm. "Prepare for a public lawsuit. Everything that happened here has been recorded. And I will make sure the world sees it." The officer swallowed hard, finally understanding the gravity of his mistake. Around him, phones remained lifted, capturing his every move. There was no undoing what had already been done. Ethan, standing tall, never took his eyes off the young officer who had wrongfully cuffed him. He knew the system all too well, how easily cases like this got buried, how people like that officer found ways to protect each other. But not this time, not when his family had suffered. "We're not just fighting for ourselves," Ethan said, his voice calm but resolute. "We're fighting for everyone who has ever faced this kind of injustice. And we won't stop until we see real change." The older officer struggled to maintain his composure, but the anxiety in his eyes was unmistakable. He cleared his throat and finally spoke. "I'll report this up the chain and request an internal investigation." But his words rang hollow in the ears of the Parker family. Lena had already decided on her next move. With unwavering determination, she strode toward the hotel reception desk, her mind set on holding the resort accountable. After all, it was their direct call that had brought the police, leading to the harassment of her family. They wouldn't escape the consequences. "We need to speak with the manager now," Lena said, her voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. The receptionist, clearly unsettled, quickly picked up the phone. Within moments, a middle-aged man with a wary expression appeared. He bowed slightly in greeting, though his eyes betrayed his discomfort. "I'm the resort manager. I understand there's been an incident, and I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding," he began, but Lena was in no mood for excuses. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was blatant discrimination. You called the police on my family with no cause. I want to know what policy of this resort justifies such treatment." The manager hesitated, struggling to find the right words, but under Lena's piercing gaze and the murmuring crowd watching the scene unfold, his defense fell apart. "We are truly sorry for this. We will conduct an internal review to ensure such incidents never happen again." Lena crossed her arms. "Sorry isn't enough. We'll be filing a public lawsuit. This won't be swept under the rug." Ethan, standing beside his wife, fixed the manager with a cold stare. They both knew this battle was far from over. Just then, the entrance doors swung open, and a man in a police uniform strode inside. His posture was commanding, his face unreadable. It was Deputy Chief Paulson, a familiar figure from press conferences and public events. Ethan recognized him instantly, the man who held power over the officers who had wronged his family. Paulson's sharp eyes scanned the room before locking onto Ethan and Lena. "I'm Deputy Chief Paulson. I've been briefed on the situation, and I want a clear account of what happened." Ethan stepped forward. "I'm Ethan Parker, an FBI agent. My family was harassed and detained by your officers without cause. I was handcuffed in front of my children, not because of any crime, but because of racial profiling. We were legitimate guests here, yet we were treated like criminals. I demand an explanation." Paulson turned to the older officer standing nearby, his expression unreadable. "Is this accurate?" The officer hesitated. "Deputy Chief, we were just following procedure. We needed to verify Mr. Parker's information." Paulson cut him off with a cold stare. "Procedure is one thing. Unjustly detaining a legitimate guest is another." He turned back to Ethan and Lena. "I sincerely apologize for what happened. An investigation will begin immediately. Those involved will be held accountable. This isn't just about police conduct. It's about the integrity of our entire department." Lena didn't flinch. An apology doesn't erase what we endured. I want concrete action. You say you'll investigate, but I want timelines, not empty promises. Paulson nodded. Our internal affairs unit will handle the investigation transparently. I will personally oversee it. If violations occurred, the officers responsible will face consequences. Ethan studied Paulson, searching for sincerity. He had spent years working within the system, but now, as its victim, he wasn't sure he could trust its promises. Keeping the pressure on was crucial. That's not enough, Ethan said, voice unwavering. I'll escalate this to higher authorities. Not just within the department but at the federal level. This cannot happen again, to my family or anyone else. Paulson's expression darkened slightly, realizing the gravity of Ethan's words. I assure you, Agent Parker, this will be handled fairly. If you have evidence, we encourage you to present it. Lena's gaze didn't waver. We have plenty of evidence. People recorded everything. And we won't hesitate to use it. Both this resort and your department will be held accountable. Paulson exhaled deeply. He knew the Parker family wasn't going to back down. I understand. The officers involved will be debriefed immediately. Thank you for bringing clarity to this situation. Turning to the young officer who had placed Ethan in cuffs, Paulson's tone grew colder. Landon, get inside and file your report. Now. The young officer, previously defiant, lowered his head and silently obeyed, disappearing inside the hotel. As Paulson ordered the withdrawal of the remaining officers, the tension lingered in the air. The crowd had stopped recording, but their murmurs continued. They knew this story wasn't over. Ethan glanced at Lena. We won the first round. Lena nodded, her expression steely. But there's a long fight ahead. Ethan knew she was right. This wouldn't end with Paulson's reassurances. This was only the beginning of a larger battle for justice. Their children stood nearby, Jackson watching his parents with admiration, Emily clinging to Lena's arm. Lena pulled them into a tight embrace. We got through this together. And no one will ever treat us like that again. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Jackson's shoulder. We're going to fight, son. And we'll make sure this never happens to another family. The resort manager hurried over, his face pale. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, we deeply regret what happened. We will fully compensate your stay. Please accept our sincerest apologies. Lena's expression didn't soften. Money doesn't erase what we've endured. We don't need a free vacation. We need justice. The manager lowered his head, realizing there was nothing he could offer to placate them. Lena exchanged a glance with Ethan. They had a plan, and nothing would stop them now. As they walked toward the exit, Jackson tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Dad, what happens next? Ethan smiled, kneeling to meet his son's gaze. Now, we fight. And we won't stop until justice is served. Lena stood by his side, pride in her eyes. That's right. We'll make sure those responsible answer for their actions. We won't back down. Hand in hand, the Parker family left the resort, stronger, more united, and more determined than ever. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they knew they weren't alone. This was only the beginning. With Lena's legal expertise, Ethan's unwavering determination, and the unbreakable love of their family, they refused to let this battle end here. The injustice they had faced would not be forgotten, nor would it be tolerated. Their fight was far from over, but they were prepared for whatever lay ahead. This time, they would not be caught off guard, and they would not allow discrimination to prevail. The Parker family was ready to take on the system and hold those responsible accountable. Their journey was not just about seeking justice for themselves, it was about standing up for every individual who had ever been unjustly treated, for every family who had suffered in silence, and for a society that deserved better. Theirs was a story of resilience, of the power of unity, and of the courage it takes to challenge deeply rooted prejudice. No matter the obstacles ahead, they would continue to fight, not just for their own rights, but for the rights of others who might not have the means or the voice to do so. Justice is never achieved through silence. It is earned through action, through speaking out even when the odds seem insurmountable, through refusing to accept mistreatment as the norm. It takes courage to confront discrimination head-on, to push back against systems that perpetuate unfairness, and to demand accountability from those in power. The Parker family understood this deeply, and they were ready to make sure that what had happened to them would never happen to anyone else again. The challenges they had faced were more than personal, they were a reflection of broader societal issues that needed to be addressed. Their story served as a powerful reminder that when confronted with injustice, silence is not an option. It is in these moments that we must stand up, speak out, and fight back. Every voice matters, every action counts, and together, change is possible. The Parker family knew that their fight was not just for today, but for a better tomorrow, a world where no one would have to suffer the humiliation and unfair treatment they had endured. But they were not alone in this battle. The overwhelming support they had received, the people who had stood by them, and the voices that had joined theirs only strengthened their resolve. They knew that as long as they kept pushing forward, they could inspire others to do the same. The fight for equality, dignity, and fairness was not just their own, it belonged to everyone who believed in justice. The road ahead would be long, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and challenges they couldn't yet foresee. But with every step, they grew stronger. Lena's expertise in law would be their guiding force, Ethan's determination would be their unwavering anchor, and the love of their children would be their ultimate motivation. They would not stop until they had dismantled the barriers of discrimination that had sought to define their experience. Their story is a call to action, a testament to the power of standing up, of demanding change, and of believing that no matter how deeply entrenched injustice may be, it can always be challenged. The Parker family's resolve was unshakable, and with the world watching, they were determined to ensure that justice was served. If their story resonated with you, if you believe in the fight for justice and equality, then join us. Stand with those who refuse to be silenced. Together, we can build a world where fairness is not just an ideal but a reality. Subscribe to our channel, share this story, and help us spread the message that discrimination and injustice have no place in our society. Because when we stand together, nothing can silence the truth. With Lena's legal expertise, Ethan's unwavering determination, and the unbreakable love of their family, they refused to let this battle end here. The injustice they had faced would not be forgotten, nor would it be tolerated. Their fight was far from over, but they were prepared for whatever lay ahead. This time, they would not be caught off guard, and they would not allow discrimination to prevail. The Parker family was ready to take on the system and hold those responsible accountable. Their journey was not just about seeking justice for themselves, it was about standing up for every individual who had ever been unjustly treated, for every family who had suffered in silence, and for a society that deserved better. Theirs was a story of resilience, of the power of unity, and of the courage it takes to challenge deeply rooted prejudice. No matter the obstacles ahead, they would continue to fight, not just for their own rights, but for the rights of others who might not have the means or the voice to do so. Justice is never achieved through silence. It is earned through action, through speaking out even when the odds seem insurmountable, through refusing to accept mistreatment as the norm. It takes courage to confront discrimination head-on, to push back against systems that perpetuate unfairness, and to demand accountability from those in power. The Parker family understood this deeply, and they were ready to make sure that what had happened to them would never happen to anyone else again. The challenges they had faced were more than personal, they were a reflection of broader societal issues that needed to be addressed. Their story served as a powerful reminder that when confronted with injustice, silence is not an option. It is in these moments that we must stand up, speak out, and fight back. Every voice matters, every action counts, and together, change is possible. The Parker family knew that their fight was not just for today, but for a better tomorrow, a world where no one would have to suffer the humiliation and unfair treatment they had endured. But they were not alone in this battle. The overwhelming support they had received, the people who had stood by them, and the voices that had joined theirs only strengthened their resolve. They knew that as long as they kept pushing forward, they could inspire others to do the same. The fight for equality, dignity, and fairness was not just their own, it belonged to everyone who believed in justice. The road ahead would be long, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and challenges they couldn't yet foresee. But with every step, they grew stronger. Lena's expertise in law would be their guiding force, Ethan's determination would be their unwavering anchor, and the love of their children would be their ultimate motivation. They would not stop until they had dismantled the barriers of discrimination that had sought to define their experience. Their story is a call to action, a testament to the power of standing up, of demanding change, and of believing that no matter how deeply entrenched injustice may be, it can always be challenged. The Parker family's resolve was unshakable, and with the world watching, they were determined to ensure that justice was served. If their story resonated with you, if you believe in the fight for justice and equality, then join us. Stand with those who refuse to be silenced. Together, we can build a world where fairness is not just an ideal but a reality. Subscribe to our channel, share this story, and help us spread the message that discrimination and injustice have no place in our society. Because when we stand together, nothing can silence the truth.